Hi, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about Expo and why you might want to use it when building your next app. So my name is Hugi Hlynsson, and I've been building user interfaces for some years now, with focus on holistic products, maintainable code, and user-friendly design. And I've mostly been using web technologies. And I'm currently employed at Kolibri, and I have no affiliations whatsoever with Expo, React Native, nor Facebook. So let's dive straight into Expo. Just as a little primer, how many of you have built an app using Expo? Okay, very few hands. How about React Native? Anyone? But how many of you have used React? Okay, that's good. So Expo is an open source toolchain for making React Native apps, and it is both a platform and a service. And Expo has its own app in the Play and App stores that you use to develop your apps on. You only write JavaScript to define your user interfaces, business logic, and to interface with the device and external services. And Expo builds on React Native and has its own collection of components to build on, as well as bundling some third-party SDKs, like a plethora of social logins, Google Maps, an SVG renderer, and more. So once your app is ready, you can publish it to Expo with a single command and let other Expo users enjoy it, or you can upload the JavaScript bundle to the Expo build service, which responds a few minutes later with an Android APK and an iOS IPA file, which you can then submit to the app stores. And Expo then provides you with a push notification service that abstracts platform differences, as well as a mechanism to push over-the-air updates directly to users running the app. So now, if you didn't have a pretty clear idea about what Expo was before stepping into this room, you're probably not any closer now. To understand what's really going on, let's take a few steps back. So it's story time. And to go all the way back to the roots of Expo, and to make everybody feel really, really old, I'm going to jump back to the beginning of Facebook 14 years ago. So the year is 2004, and Facebook just launched their website. And as the creator of React and React Native, Facebook plays a main role in the preface of Expo. They launched their website and got hugely popular in the following years. And to begin with, it actually used the domain thefacebook.com, but soon bought the current domain for a pretty big sum at that time. 2007 marked the beginning in mobile app thinking as we know it today, when the iPhone was announced. And while the device came with a few native apps, there was no app store. Steve Jobs said that you can write amazing Web.2 and Ajax apps for it. And that same year, Facebook launches a mobile-optimized site at m.facebook.com. At that time, the technology to make responsive websites was really immature, and most people believed that separate mobile apps or mobile websites were the way to go. And whether it was Apple's plan all along or just pressure from developers, Apple released an iOS software development kit in 2008, and Facebook is among the 500 initial apps. This SDK uses an environment that macOS developers are used to, Xcode as the IDE, and Objective-C as the main language. And meanwhile, Android is released, and developers can start making their own apps using the Android SDK writing Java, usually with the Eclipse IDE. Google later releases Android Studio as its successor. The developer experience is similar to the one on iOS. To see changes in an app, you have to rebuild the project from scratch, taking at least a few minutes. And the workflow has been improved on since then, but it still requires the developer to rebuild big parts of the app quite often. So until 2010, Facebook has had 3 groups of developers working on the same features: iOS, Android, and the web. And at that point, the Facebook mobile team puts 2 years into building an HTML5 version of its app, but eventually blows off the effort after performance issues and lacking native APIs. And Mark Zuckerberg is quoted saying that this was their biggest mistake to date, while later commenting that he actually kind of loves HTML5, but it just wasn't ready at the time. So meanwhile, on the website, there's an explosion in building apps, and they're getting bigger and more complex fast. The web tools at the time weren't really designed for scale, and Facebook is feeling this the hard way. They come up with a library to handle this complexity and start using it to render parts of the timeline on Facebook.com. And to glance over React, it is a view layer library that can be seen as the view in a model view controller framework. So instead of mutating the DOM directly using an imperative API, React approaches user interfaces in a functional way. Its render loop is a function of the state. By using a virtual DOM, it also gets around some browser inconsistencies and can apply some performance optimizations. React conventionally uses a HTML lookalike syntax for JavaScript called JSX and follows the mantra of composition over inheritance with encapsulated self-sufficient components. And now to the real stuff. React Native started as a hackathon project at Facebook in the summer of 2013, where engineers figured a way to manipulate iOS UI elements directly from a JavaScript thread. And many months passed as the project went from being a proof of concept to a usable project. But in 2015, Facebook releases their first React Native app, the Ads Manager. And in March that year, React Native is open sourced, and React is split into the core React and React DOM. So React Native uses the rendering engine and lifecycle pipeline from React. But instead of writing divs and p elements, like you'd be used on the web, you'd write views and text components. It uses a styling syntax that is an abstraction that behaves similar to CSS, using Flexbox for layout, but it's not actually cascading. And React Native then gives you access to native APIs like keyboard events, alerts, and linking. In 2016, React Native gains Android support, abstracting the differences between the platforms. This means that in most cases, you'll write just a single component and styles that get rendered to both platforms. Components like switches and scroll views look and feel exactly like the native components that you are used to seeing on the platforms. For things that are different between the platforms, like date picking and how back buttons behave, React Native gives you some tools to create fitting experiences for both platforms. And Android support was quite lacking when they released it to begin with, but has been getting closer to parity to iOS ever since. But you can still tell today that iOS has had a 2-year head start. But at this point, it really becomes realistic to have a single developer work on the same product on 3 different platforms. So when you're building a React Native app and want to build for both platforms, you'll be using a Mac and set up Android Studio as well as Xcode. If you're lucky hitting all the right checkboxes and the internet is in a good mood that day, this should only take a couple of hours. And when you sit down every day and get started, you'll usually start by building the project, which takes around 5 minutes. And after that, React Native can push updates to the app, so you get a pretty immediate response from saving the code in your editor until you see it in the app. And when it comes to publishing the builds to the App Store, you'll be managing a bunch of certificates and might be looking at a configuration tool like Fastlane for your build pipeline. So now you might be wondering, all right, this is like a hybrid app or something, so performance probably sucks. Well, that's one of the main things that Facebook got over in their 2-year development time. And the JavaScript code is run on a main thread, while the interface runs on a separate UI thread. And while JavaScript can interact directly with the user interface, doing so often would result in a stuttering UI that could lead to a worse experience than using a web view. And this is where React's functional approach comes in handy. Since the render function is pure, with no side effects, it can batch up messages to the user interface and get a smooth, native-feeling interface. And React's animated library provides a way to run animations restricted to the GPU on the native thread, so you get a 60 FPS interface by default. And while React Native definitely isn't the fastest out there, since it is running JavaScript, which is usually not optimized on mobile devices, it's fast enough by default, and it's easy to write code that isn't slow. If you hit some performance walls, though, like if you have a really dynamic UI, getting out of them might be tricky without resorting to writing native code. There are about 20 engineers at Facebook dedicated to working on React Native, but a big chunk of the commits come from the community, both from other large companies, but also individuals. React Native releases breaking updates with new features and fixes every month. And usually the migration path is really simple, but there have been hiccups. And one update, for example, changed how native bindings were registered that had a cascading effect, blocking your app's update until all your sub packages had updated themselves. So React Native isn't all roses. Using only the API provided by it comes with quite a lot of limitations. But if you can be flexible with your product and design, this will be much less of an issue. But if you have complex UI, looking at the native platforms directly might be more fitting. While you can't dive into native code, it kind of defeats the purpose for larger portions of your app. And you might just be better off going all native. And of course, there are some competitors in this hybrid space that might be better fitting here, like Xamarin, Ionic, or even progressive web apps, if you're really on the bleeding edge. So finally, we get to the point of this talk. As I mentioned before, Expo is a collection of tools and services built on top of React Native. Expo's promise is that you just write JavaScript, and they take care of the rest. Instead of having to set up the whole native build chain, Expo lets you get started by only installing Node. And in a matter of minutes, you can start coding in your favorite text editor and see the changes on your device instantly as you save the code. And one command lets you publish your JavaScript bundle to Expo that lets anyone with the Expo app scan a QR code and run it. After installing the exp npm package, you just start run. Expo creates a QR code that allows the Expo app on your phone to connect to your local machine for development. Create some sort of a tunnel. It starts building the project and then streams the bundle to the app. And depending on your machine and the size of the project, this can take a couple of minutes. And after the initial build, however, whenever you make any changes, the build pipeline can take just the changed components and inject them into the bundle on the fly. So this means that you can have an untethered device and see your changes immediately, and this just works every time, even with multiple devices on multiple platforms at the same time. So you can have an iOS phone and an Android phone lying on your desk, hit save in your editor, and see the changes on both platforms immediately. It's quite mind-blowing. And the Expo SDK is what makes it possible to offer this kind of a workflow. So it has a collection of commonly used native components that aren't in React Native. This includes a bunch of handy native APIs, like a simple cross-platform push notification solution, multiple sensor connections, and a camera API, to name a few. And by constraining the native bindings only to Expo and React Native, this experience can be created. So when a new version of React Native is released, Expo does the work of making it comparable with minimal changes to your code. And this means that you get the latest update of React Native a week after each stable version is released, practically for free. And since Expo takes care of all the native bindings, the change surface when updating React Native is only a matter of bumping a few dependencies. So traditionally, the only path to get changes to users has been submitting a new binary to the app stores. And Apple used to take up to a week reviewing each new submission, so it used to have a huge impact on the development. But they have since then improved on the reviewing times, but it's still quite a process to go from building the binaries, going through the submission process, and finally seeing your app updated with the new content in the app stores. Today, in Apple's case, this usually takes around 2 days, all included. And that's business days. And this isn't great when you're trying to fix a critical bug. So since we're only writing JavaScript and not changing any native bindings, we can just update the bundle on the user's device on the fly. So all changes except Expo updates, assets, and changes to the app's configuration, like permissions and icons, can be pushed over the air. And the user will run the new code as soon as they open the app for the next time. So while you can use packages from the whole JavaScript ecosystem when you're using Expo, you cannot use any React Native packages that include native bindings, other than those that are included already in Expo. So you can hope that Expo will include them in their own bundle with a later update, or take things in your own hands. So if you hit any barriers where you desperately need to access native code or a package that does, Expo leaves you with the option of detaching or rejecting. And this means that you leave the Expo app, publishing and building services behind, and will have to set up Xcode and Android Studio build chains. And you can still use the Expo SDK by manually including the Expo kit package in the builds. And Expo also created this really nice coding playground that's similar to CodePen or JS Fiddle that allows you to share a React Native component with access to the Expo SDK and run it either in a browser or on your own device. So 5 months ago, Kolibri started a new collaboration, building an app with TM to make the process of filing claims easy. The app was officially announced yesterday, so you can take a look at it now if you're interested. And the core team was set up by 5 people: a producer, a designer, a DevOps-oriented programmer, a backend-oriented programmer with lots of in-house knowledge, and me, a UI-oriented programmer. And TM's internal tech department went from dabbling with Angular to writing React for all the new code, so it seemed only logical to take a hard look at React Native. And my friends at Viska Learning and Takumi haven't stopped praising Expo since they started using it around a year ago, so we decided to use it as our starting point. And when the project started, we decided to take about 2 weeks to write a proof of concept. And I was the only one with experience writing mobile apps, but all 3 of us developers got up to speed quite quickly. And since we started with a blank slate design-wise, it was really easy to align the UI to what was trivial to do with Expo. After about 3 weeks, we had a functional login and a scripted chatbot that could handle a simple claims flow. And it was really invaluable to be able to show stakeholders what idea we had for the product and get them on board this early. So in the beginning of the project, we wanted to be able to move fast and get feedback quickly. And using the Expo app didn't only come in handy when developing, but it also had a huge impact on validating ideas and doing quality assurance, both within and outside of the team. By having our continuous integration system listen to changes every time a Git commit was made, we could publish a build to Expo for every branch. it would post an Expo link to our Build Slack channel, and everybody could instantly launch a new version of the app. So getting feedback from a designer or a product manager was really only one link away. And when the branch was updated, the user would get a new version, the newest version, as soon as they restarted the app. So from the time that the team was assembled and we had nailed down the idea for this project, it took about 5 months until we felt the app was complete enough to be submitted to the app stores. While we could have shipped much earlier, the ability to iterate, make prototypes of specific features, and get feedback quickly allowed us to get to a place where everybody felt pretty comfortable. Developers, designers, and the ones paying the bills. It hasn't been all roses. We've had to make tough decisions to delay features because of Expo limitations or nasty bugs. But I think that it is the nature of a project like this, where you sacrifice some features in order to bring a mature product into the hands of your users faster. And at the end, Expo can probably be summed up as bringing the best development practices and iteration speeds from the web to native mobile app development, while holding on to the integrated feel and polish of apps. And while you probably shouldn't start rewriting all your current apps from scratch in Expo, it can be a fantastic starting point or just a fun tool to make a nice prototype. So head over to expo.io if you're curious about learning more. And if you're interested, you can find me on the internet by following my name. Thank you.